Hello and welcome again to Best Friends Dissimilar Interests, a podcast where two friends try to learn a little bit more about each other each week by sharing their dissimilar interests and everything that they know nothing about from the other person. So my name is Tiberi.
And I'm Matt.
And this week, Matt, you had me watch a documentary, which is kind of new to our show here, so I think this is going to be a fun discussion, if not a little bit different from what we've seen before. So why don't you tell everybody who's listening what you had me watch this week?
Yeah, so this week you watched Harlan County, USA. I did pretty limited research on it because I wanted to kind of, just the back and forth of what you watched be kind of the brunt of this. So I don't have too much to introduce, but it was directed by Barbara Koppel, and it was released in 1976.
Mm-hmm.
And it documents a strike. Let's see here. Let me get the date. It documents a strike that happened in 1973. It was 180 coal miners striking against Duke Power Company in Harlan County, USA. Or, Harlan County, Kentucky, not USA.
Harlan County, USA.
So that's kind of the, just a little intro about it. Like I said, I didn't do a ton.
Yeah, sure.
I do have a little bit about the, socioeconomic background of Appalachia at the time, and just a little bit about that. I also wanted to put some context around Bloody Harlan, because that is something that comes up a few times throughout the documentary. People talk about Bloody Harlan, how they were there, what they saw, but it doesn't really, it doesn't really say what that was. So I wanted to kind of give you that context.
Okay, that was actually something I was going to ask you. I'm glad you're doing this because that was literally the number one question on my list here. So yeah, please explain to me what the hell Bloody Harlan is.
Yeah, and so I think that it's kind of an interesting choice of the documentary, because what she wanted to do was, she didn't want to have like a narrator. She wanted just the things that were actually captured by the camera, the people that were there to kind of be the story. But because of that, like, everyone present in Harlan knows what Bloody Harlan was. So that's just never explained, because everybody's talking to each other like, oh yeah, I was alive during Bloody Harlan. And of course they don't really need to ask, what was that? Because, everybody just knows. So a byproduct of that is, like, the documentary just kind of expects you to know what that is. So yeah, I definitely had to do some research on that my first time.
Yeah, because there were a few points where I had that same thing where I thought it was implicitly understood, but I wasn't sure, and I kind of felt a little bit like I was stupid, maybe. And I was like, is there some big historical event like I'm not seeing here in my memory, or what?
Man, there aren't great resources in general about, like, widely accessible resources in general about Appalachian labor movements, and especially like the super violent aspects of it.
Sure.
So even like when I was specifically researching this, without going and buying these books, when I was just trying to find some like decent resources online that laid out, okay, on this date this happened, on that date this happened. Literally, the best resource is Wikipedia, because somebody has just lovingly taken all of these newspaper reports from the 30s and constructed a bit of a narrative on Wikipedia. So that is unironically the best resource online.
Fucking hero, if anything.
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. Like, and I've said it before. Wikipedia rules, and anybody that's like, oh, that's not a real source, like, come on. Like, there's some really good stuff on Wikipedia.
If you look me in the eye and tell me you've never used fucking Wikipedia for anything serious, you're a damn liar, and I will stand by that fact.
So I will get to Bloody Harlan in just a moment. I wanted to start by just giving some very basic facts about poverty in Appalachia, because as we see in the documentary, it's just a bunch of very impoverished people, working people who are fighting really hard because they have to. You know what I mean? They don't have anything else. So if they lose this strike, if they don't get what they need, then, they're just absolutely shit out of luck. So I thought that was kind of important to touch on.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so these statistics that I have are from 1964, which is obviously a little bit before, almost 10 years before the when this documentary was being filmed in 1973. So in 1964, a third of all Appalachians lived in poverty, and that was an average. So in Central Appalachia, which is, like Northeast Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, East Kentucky, and then the entirety of West Virginia, that bore the brunt of that poverty. Like it was, worse in and higher rates there than throughout the rest of Appalachia.
Right.
So even 1 in 3 is probably kind of a low estimate.
And that was something too, and this is actually a point we'll get to in the actual narrative, but somebody mentions at one point, that they just barely, with all the money they made, were able to afford a 6th grade education, I think. And I was like, wow, I take that shit for granted. Like, geez, these people fought tooth and nail just for that.
Yeah, no, she, that woman, I remember you talking about it. I actually watched this again today just to make sure I was fresh on it. And she is great. And she talks about how, she was able to get a 6th grade education because, her father worked, but once she got that old, it was kind of like, well, she had to start working because they just didn't have the money for her to continue going to school. Like she had to get a job and she had to contribute.
Yeah.
And, like that was the 70s. Like we are not far from that experience. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, more recently have some experiences like that. But I mean, even my grandparents, my grandfather had a 6th grade education. My grandmother had a 2nd grade education for the same reasons. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like, yeah, like people, we really take for granted, like even, people will be like, oh, they only have a high school education. It's like, that's a lot. You know what I mean? Like we should really appreciate that high school education.
It is, and I think it's just a good testament to that point. Like hearing you say that a third of all Appalachians are in poverty, that checks out. I mean, granted, what I heard in the feedback from the actual narrative, which we'll get into that later, but yeah, moral of the story: stay in school, kids. It's actually very important, and people have fought for it, and it's a wonderful thing if you use it right. So,
yeah, if that is an option for you, definitely do what you can with it. But anyway, so yeah, those statistics were from 1964. In 1964, let me make sure I have the name right before I say this incorrectly. It was a government agency created by President Johnson. Yeah, so the name of the agency is the Appalachian Regional Commission, and they have, since 1964, they have worked to, get rid of, ideally get rid of poverty in Appalachia. It is down to, and it's different across the different areas of Appalachia. But if we're talking still about Central Appalachia that I was just talking about, the number is down to 20%, which, is better. But, the national average is still 11%. So it's still significantly more than the national average.
Sure.
And since, 2020, I think, it has been on the rise, I think, for the first time since 1964.
Oh no, that ain't good.
Yeah, so that ain't good, man, but I'm honestly not surprised based on the decisions that we've allowed people to make. So, but I'm not going to get preachy.
That's another podcast.
But I'm not going to get preachy.
Don't worry about it. We have our opinions. You do too. But hey, let's talk about that another time, right?
Yeah. So, and this is a personal opinion that we're about to come to, but I've seen a lot of discourse about people, maybe not so much anymore, but I've seen a lot of things that has compared the poverty in Appalachia to that of the third world. And I have also seen a lot of Appalachians specifically like really push back against that, and they're like, that's shitty, whatever. And there was even in the 90s, I didn't know about this until recently. Like I'd heard that claim before, but in the 90s there was this travel agency that kind of specialized in poverty tourism, which is really fucked up.
Oh my God. What
yeah,
the hell?
so
Are you serious?
Oh no, man, that's still a thing. Like, these fucking, Instagram influencers will go to these poor countries and be like, oh, look at me, I'm so great, I'm helping. And they, don't do shit. You know what I mean? It's just so they can like get that emotional high without doing anything. But anyway, so they, in the 90s, what I'm getting at is this, tourism company or whatever, was creating tours of Appalachia when their specialty was, poverty. So they were like, come see and they even billed it as the third world of America. And a lot of people were upset. Yeah, a lot of people were upset. And what I take, like, obviously it's shitty, but what I think is true that even they probably didn't mean and didn't realize is I think Appalachia is poor for the same reasons that the third world is poor, which is, other people took their wealth. You know what I mean? Like,
sure,
colonial powers, colonial. Oh, you go ahead.
100% agree. It's just, they got the short end of the stick, so to speak. They got the bad hand, and it's not their fault, but it's just the reality of things. And it's terrible to look at somebody who needs help and then you're like, look at them, right? Isn't that crazy? It's like, oh, come the fuck on.
Yeah. So, like the third world is poor because colonial powers took their natural resources. And it's the same with Appalachia. These outside companies from especially the north came in, took all the coal, and you ruined the land and left nothing. You know what I mean? Left nothing but these, impoverished communities. So I don't think that they meant to make that comparison, and I don't know if they even understood necessarily what they were saying. But I think it's true. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Oh, but yeah, that's kind of all of the stuff that I had about that. I did want to tell you a little bit about Bloody Harlan.
Okay. Yeah, please.
So, you go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah, please. I'm very much interested because it seems, from what I gathered from the documentary, it seemed like violence is not foreign to that town, to that county.
Yeah, so I mean, it is within the context of the coal wars that took place in Appalachia and also out west in places like Colorado. I know a lot more about the coal wars in Appalachia. The kind of the big event of the coal wars was the Battle of Blair Mountain, where it was like literally 15,000 men on a mountain, just like at war with each other, trying to march over the mountain to unionize some counties in West Virginia that had been like violently repressed.
Right.
But anyway, so specifically, that's kind of the context of Bloody Harlan. Like, this is a little bit later than all that. That stuff was in the 20s. This is 1931 to 1939. So once again, it was union activists and coal miners on one side, with the coal company owners who paid hired thugs and the police on the other. There were skirmishes, executions, bombings, and strikes.
Jesus Christ! Like,
so yeah, it got bad, man.
Oof, that's a lot to take in, honestly. And again, it's like we take so much shit for granted nowadays, and man, I'm so appreciative.
Yeah, no, it's like whenever. And like obviously everybody's just like, oh, it's the weekend. But I mean, it's so easy to forget that like people died so that we could have a weekend. You know what I mean? Like people killed and died for that.
It's crazy.
Yeah. But anyway, so kind of where people mark the beginning of Bloody Harlan was February 16th, 1931. The Harlan County Coal Operator Association cut wages by 10% simply to maximize profits. Obviously, people were very upset. And the United Mine Workers of America saw their chance to move into Harlan County and, make a play, try and unionize it. I did want to kind of explain the company town system because I don't know if people from outside Appalachia will necessarily be familiar with that. But basically,
I'm not sure I'm even familiar with it with my background.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, company towns were, what they sound like. The town where all the workers of the mine, they all lived in this town where everything was owned and run by the companies. All the homes were owned by the company. The store was run by the company. You were paid in company scrip, so you weren't paid in U.S. dollars. You were paid in money that could only be used at the company store, so they could charge whatever they wanted for their goods because that's all you could do with that money.
Fuck off.
Yeah. So the mines owned the homes, so when people started joining the union, or if they were just suspected of joining union, they were fired and evicted from their homes. So they just straight up kicked these families out of their homes. They had nowhere to go. You know what I mean? And this was en masse. Like an entire town was just evicted.
That's fucking nonsense.
Yeah, no, dude, I read this really good book by the grandson of a guy who was a leader at Blair Mountain. And he talks about, the company store system. And he's like, yeah, people talk about how it's so crazy in the 1910s Russia that they were living as serfs, and that, that's why they turned to communism, and that's why they overthrew the government. And he's like, motherfucker, look at what they're doing in Appalachia. We were serfs. You know what I mean? Like, this was after that, and we were still living that way. Like, it's not that foreign.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's one thing if there's like an incentive bonus where you can get like in-company currency and like use it for perks or whatever, or equipment, whatever. But it's another to say that's your baseline wage. You know what I mean? It's one thing to have that as a supplementary to a good wage. But God, I can't imagine living everything in my life through the company I work at. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it was. These companies did everything they could do to completely control their workers' lives so that they had no option but to work in the mine and to work for whatever they were given, so it was,
goodness.
Yeah, it was terrible. But anyway, so all these miners were being evicted. The miners just, all of them went on strike. Even the non-union ones, they're like, fuck this, we're going on strike, in solidarity with their neighbors. There were only 3 towns in the county of Harlan that weren't company towns. So obviously these people just went to the non-company towns looking for work, looking for help. Most of them went to a town called Evart. And the citizens of those towns, really stepped up and they really tried to help them. A lot of it was, I'm sure, just a lot of people out of the goodness of their heart. They're like, oh, wow, you're in, you're from one town over. You're in the same situation as me. Like, let's help you out. Some of it were, local politicians and local business owners that really didn't like that the company had so much power. They wanted some of that power. They didn't want to compete with the company town because they couldn't, use that script. So they're like, yeah, fuck the company town. We're going to help these people so we can, get some of that power ourselves. So I'm not going to pretend and say like, oh, everybody did it out of the goodness of their heart, but still.
I mean, yeah, people are people no matter who they're working for or working with.
So anyway, so they were helping out the evicted miners. The company brought in scabs, which are workers that cross the picket line, and obviously are non-union workers who cross the picket line and try and break a strike.
And so correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just so unfamiliar with any kind of labor terminology. So like a scab essentially is like, hey, I'm on strike. And then they say, okay, if you guys aren't going to work, we're going to hire people who will. And then they just essentially, they're saying, we're going to keep working without you. Go strike if you want.
Yeah, so the ones who cross that picket line are scabs. In, a lot of time, like, especially modern day, the scabs are just people who, are from the community that got that job or whatever, or even people who were already working there and didn't go on strike with their coworkers. They just decided to keep working. And
Right.
Once you cross that picket line, you're a scab.
Too risky, right.
At this point, especially this time, everybody in the town basically was like, fuck this, we're going on strike. And this was a common practice back at this point, is they would bring in black workers, Italian workers, stuff like that they could use to kind of sow divisions. So they'd be like, oh, okay, well, the locals aren't gonna, for one, they don't speak the same language as the Italians, and for two, they're, there's this natural animosity of like, they don't like Italians or whatever. So they would kind of create divisions that way, and they would try and, even if somebody didn't have any prejudice against Italians, they would try and create that prejudice of like, oh, okay, that Italian took my job, that then they couldn't build solidarity. So that was a really common practice. And like I said, in this case, they would have had to bring in outside workers because the whole town was on strike. Right. That's what they did. In this case, I don't know, where these workers came from, but, they brought in outside workers. This was another common practice. They had armed guards that were made sheriff's deputies. They were deputized in the county so that they could just do whatever they wanted. They could threaten people, they could shoot people, they could beat people. They worked with impunity. You know what I mean?
God. Okay. Yeah, it's I think it's a lot more complicated than people realize, because I think a lot of people, when they hear the word like coal mine, they just go, oh yeah, it's a coal mine, we need it. It's like, well, hang on now. Let's talk about the history here. And I always knew before going into this, like, there was a lot more to it than I knew of, that I was just kind of ignorant to. And specifically, this has kind of opened my eyes to a lot, to because again, this isn't something we're taught really in schools a lot of the time. You see it, and you'll get in a textbook, but it's like no one really dives into like the socioeconomic impacts of it, or like the cultural impacts of it, because this is something that really should be talked about more. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, the cynical part of me is like, there's a reason they don't teach it. You know what I mean? These textbooks are approved on the state level, you know what I mean, by state government employees that really don't want people to know that, oh, my granddaddy probably shot somebody in the name of forming a union. You know what I mean? Or my granddaddy was killed because he joined a union, Big
learning at it again, stopping us.
Yeah. We don't need no education, am I right?
Absolutely. But going back to Bloody Harlan then, so specifically what happened to call it Bloody Harlan?
Yeah, so we are gonna get there. Guards were deputized by Sheriff J.H. Blair, who, that should be a name that you heard in.
Yes.
Yeah, so he was the sheriff of Harlan at the time. I have a quote by him that he was not. He did not even pretend to be an impartial observer or somebody that was trying to just like fairly, enforce the law. His quote is, "I did all in my power to aid the operators. There was no compromises when labor troubles swept the county and the Reds came to Harlan County."
Okay, that's pretty strong verbiage.
Yeah. So, and I mean, some of it is literally just people wanting to be treated fairly. But I mean, communists did literally come to Harlan County and try and unionize it. So, I mean, he's not wrong there, but he's still like openly just like, oh yeah, fuck my neighbors. So yeah, J.H. Blair, like I said, he deputized the mine guards so that they could act with impunity. In the film, you saw a woman named Florence Reese sing her song, "Which Side Are You On?" Do you remember that?
Yes, that was really cool.
Yeah, so that is like a big labor song. Like to this day, people cover "Which Side Are You On?" People love it. I just have her quote about why she wrote it and how she wrote it that I thought was really cool. So she said, "Sheriff J.H. Blair and his men came to our house in search of Sam. That's my husband. He was one of the union leaders. I was home alone with our 7 children. They ransacked the whole house and then kept watch outside, waiting to shoot Sam down when he came back. But he didn't come home that night. Afterward, I tore a sheet from a calendar on the wall and wrote the words to "Which Side Are You On?" to an old Baptist hymn, "Lay the Lily Low." My song always goes to the underdog, to the worker. I'm one of them, and I felt like I've got to be with them. There's no such thing as neutral. You have to be on one side or the other. Some people say, I don't take sides, I'm neutral. There's no such thing. In your mind, you're on one side or the other. In Harlan County, there wasn't no neutral. If you wasn't a gun thug, you were a union man. You had to be. And I really like that. She's just like, look, this is a fight for the soul of our county. Pick a side. You know what I mean? Like, don't try and sidestep it.
Yeah, and of course, you could argue that theology may be a little, I can see the argument that might be a little, maybe, short-sighted, because obviously, and this is a complex issue, but I definitely understand where she's coming from, and people are dying, and it's like you have to either, are you oppressing or are you being oppressed? It's like, it's hard to, you always want to play devil's advocate with people, right? You always want to play devil's advocate and say, there's good in people and that their actions are just their actions because it's a job or whatever. But it's hard when it's happening to you. You know what I mean? It's always that thing where you need to kind of put yourself in someone else's shoes and just ask, like what side are you on and why? And I think that's a question I want to tag on. It's like, what side are you on and why are you on that side? Is it just your job? Because in some way, it's like, it's a little more understandable at that point,
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely get that. But I also understand, like, especially in this, when it's this dire, when people are literally dying, if you're, killing for the company, I mean, you've sold your soul. You know what I mean? So I understand why she's like, look, either you're with the union or you're against it. Like, even if you're just like sitting in your house, not doing anything, if you're not helping us, if you're not helping your neighbors, you've killed us. You know what I mean? So I think that that's definitely an interesting outlook. Gunfights between the miners and the paid guards and the cops became, I mean, pretty common. Like, this was a war zone. Scabs is pretty often that as scabs were going to work, they were set upon and beaten, to, try and get them to not work. Kind of the big event at like the beginning of this is called the Battle of Evarts. It happened on May 5th, 1931. Some Union miners lay in ambush above a road, and as the guards drove in with supplies for the mine, they just opened fire. They just opened fire on these cars. 3 guards were killed, and one of the Union miners.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so at this point, the governor was like, this is getting fucking wild. So he called in the National Guard. The locals expected, they were like, okay, great. You know what I mean? This reign of terror is going to end. They're going to expel the guards. We're going to be able to continue our strike in peace, and we can move on. Instead, the National Guards showed up and just beat the shit out of the strikers, and they're like, the strike's over. Either get in there or the scabs are going in. Wow. And so, yeah, and that played out again and again, because, like I said, this was still the early 30s. This went on until 1939.
Jesus.
So, that's kind of, like I said, this happened a bunch. On May 24th of the same year, a Union rally was tear gassed by Sheriff Blair, who rescinded the county members' right to assemble so that you could no longer assemble in Harlan County. By June 17th, the last mine had returned to work. No concessions were given to the union operators, and the United Mine Workers, the membership plummeted. They were kicked out of Harlan.
Well, shit. That's... Yeah. Jesus.
Yeah, and like I said, this happened again and again for nearly a decade. There were other unions that made plays for Harlan County, including one that was explicitly like the Communist Miners Union. That was kind of going okay. Like, they opened up a bunch of soup kitchens, and they were really trying to have a more, just like really aid everyone in the community, and that was the approach that they were going for. But when, especially kind of the faith leaders or, pastors or whatever, found out, how the communists felt about religion, they were like, oh, fuck no, these guys got to get out. And there was like a young guy from, I think, like New York. He was murdered and like just all kinds of shit. Anyway, what finally changed was the Wagner Act was passed in 1935, which outlawed yellow dog contracts, which were contracts that upon your employment, you signed a contract saying that you would not join a union. Company unions, which were just these toothless unions that were ran by the company that were, I mean, they're clubs, you know what I mean? They weren't a labor union.
Yeah.
The blacklisting of union miners, and just discrimination based on union status. So it outlawed all of that. It was still a really long process, and it took until 1939 for the United Mine Workers to finally unionize the county.
Well, Jesus. So is that kind of the full extent of the whole Bloody Harlem? It's just kind of that cyclical nature of violence, just to back and forth, the union in and out of these plants, or these coal mines? Yeah,
they would, make plays, try and unionize, and, basically violent repression by the coal operators, and both state and local troops were brought into Harlan, I think, like 9 times, like at least once a year, basically. So yeah, it was really bad. It was really violent. It's kind of an unknown number of dead. Like, people aren't sure how many people were killed because it just wasn't well documented, Yeah,
100%. And it's, yeah, it's, and something too, my wife mentioned when we were watching this, there's no internet back then. You don't even have, most people don't even have like telephones and shit back then. it's all mail, right? So I mean, you don't have news coverage, you don't have TV stations. Well, you have TV, but like, you know what I'm saying? It's not like everywhere, especially in this area of the country. You know what I'm saying? So that lack of media and kind of how do I say, obscuring what's happening. You know, people aren't going to see this, and they're not going to react to it outside of the area outside the locals that live there who have no power. So it's interesting.
Yeah, the only reason that we really have records of what happened is because, for one, the New York Times did cover it. Like, as these things were happening, they covered it because there were trials and everything. That was kind of, from what I saw, that was kind of the only major newspaper that covered it. And then there was also a big report that was commissioned by the Communist Party of America that they were like, okay, these are the workers that are really being oppressed in America. Like, these are the people that we need to see what's going on. So there was actually a report. That is one of the reasons that a lot of this was documented, because the literal Communist Party of America was like, how do we help these people? What do we do? You know what I mean? But yeah, that's kind of everything I had on Bloody Harlan. From here, I thought we could just dive straight into the documentary now that you had a little bit more context.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because like I said, it's something that I was never really taught in school. I always taught there were union strikes and union, how do I say, discourses and arguments with the coal mines, specifically in like West Virginia and all that. And but aside from that, I was never, and mind you, I wasn't a history major, but I was never really taught in any explicit detail, like, the implications of that and what it meant, be that intentional or not. But so yeah, I think we can dive right in here. With all that in mind, it kind of brings a few of these topics a little bit closer to light. Like I mentioned to you too, Matt, this is kind of a new format for us, so really there's not much of a beat by beat, like a traditional story like we did like for like a TV show or a movie or anything like that. So this will be kind of just some interesting discussion points of the highlights I took from this and some interesting scenes that kind of stuck with me. But yeah, I guess if you're ready, then I'll dive into it and kind of walk through what I've got here, and maybe we can discuss a little bit more, and maybe with your history in mind, will kind of shed some light on some more kind of specific incidents.
Yeah, and there's definitely some parts that I want to touch on that I just think are really cool, or really just whatever. But yeah, just dive in, and if there's anything I want to bring up, then I will bring it up, and I'm excited to just talk about what you saw.
Okay. Harlan County, USA. So I have to preface, to anybody who's familiar with Zoolander, I have to refrain this entire fucking episode from saying the line. I know it, but it's people died, so I will not say it. But
wait, what's the line?
Oh, the black lung pop.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
You made me say it, you fucker. You made me say it.
Every time I see that fucking horrifying part when they like have the lung, that they're like, this is what your brother's lung looked like when he was autopsied, and it just crumbles in the back of my mind. I'm sitting here like, I have the black lung pop.
That was Mikas's lung, you piece of shit.
Yeah. God damn. That's
anyway,
grim.
It's really grim. Anyway, back to the harrowing documentary. Apologies to anybody who may be offended by that. So Harlan County, USA. We start off. We have this opening, and it's pretty abrupt. It's just a man working, screaming "fire in the hole" a few times to warn his comrades, to warn his coworkers that he's dropping dynamite, more than likely, or some kind of explosion. And then there's this massive explosion. You can see the backdraft like hitting his clothes and blowing him about and shaking the whole room or cavern he's in. And it's just this really like, holy shit, like this is just like another day for this guy. Mind you, he's only wearing like a helmet. He's not wearing anything else. And it's like, how the fuck is this guy working like this? And I know it's like the 70s, but like, what the hell is going on here? First and foremost, OSHA, where the hell are you? Do you even exist yet? I don't even know if OSHA even exists yet at this point in time. But pretty immediately, it's like, wow, this is just another world, It's funny, we complain about our shitty little jobs in coffee shops and shit, but it's like, God, these guys have it so much fucking worse.
Yeah, and that is one thing that in the documentary they talk about, like how far America lagged behind the rest of the world in safety in these mines.
Yes,
and that's why a lot of these strikes happened, is because people were like, I'm gonna die in this hole. Like something needs to change.
And we will get to that more in depth, but yeah. So it kind of shows that, and it kind of, the whole first part of this movie, this documentary, kind of just covers like, what it looks like inside the mine. Like, here's a conveyor belt of people getting on this conveyor in and out of the mine. Here's this, people going in on these long ass vehicles that are really short in and out of these tiny little caverns. And like they're moving real fast. The rock ceiling is only like a few feet above their heads. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going? Something I noted here is that like there's like so much capital equipment. There's so much money in the actual physical machinery. But then, like you said, I look at this guy and all he's got is a fucking helmet on. And I'm just like, how can we afford the big machinery and not the helmet and the mask and gloves? Whatever. But yeah, I made a note of that. So it kind of just keeps going on. There's a really fun little shot I liked here where it has a guy and he just pulls a moon pie out and he's just fucking eating the shit out of that moon pie. And he's like, hell yeah. And I'm like, hell yeah, moon pies never die. Fucking 1930 or 1973 to fucking 2024. Moon pies never die, boys.
Do they have moon pies across the country now? Like, can you get a moon pie in California?
If not, then California needs to wake the fuck up. But
I understand why those people in California want to secede now. If I lived somewhere where I couldn't get a moon pie, I'd also be like, this is bullshit. I want my own country.
Road trip. We're going to go bring justice to California. Just drop off a fucking crate of moon pies on fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger's desk.
And I'll leave like a little note that's like, this is how long you microwave it to get the chocolate melty, and the marshmallow puffs up like a little bit, but it doesn't completely wreck it. It's still a sandwich.
Fucking moon pies. But no, yeah. So, it's just, it's clear. Like, I like shots like that because it shows, these are fucking people. Like, they're, they have these subtle little things they're doing. It's just very human. But yeah, so it kind of shows basically like a lot of the equipment there, and it's crazy the amount of engineering and time that went into that shit. But it cuts to a man, and he's singing in his rocking chair about his career. It's a coal mining song, and he says, he's been in the mines for 42 years, and it's not clear if he wrote the song, but either way, it's super fucking impactful. And he's just singing about the sorrows and the dangers and all the bad things that's happened to him. And it's just really fucking like, it's hard to hear, but it's also, you can tell he's been through it, and it makes it that much more of like a haunting song.
Yeah, and that's one thing it was very intentional on the part of the director. She wanted to really show the culture of Appalachia, and the way she wanted to do that was through all the music, both recorded by professional musicians that was then kind of overlaid over the footage, and also just people singing, like traditional folk songs. So yeah, I thought that's one of my favorite things about the movie, is just all the music that's used.
And a lot of people kind of confuse folk singing and bluegrass with modern country, and they kind of lump it all together. And it's like, no, this is real music. And that's what my wife and I talked about too. Like, this is music by people who know how to play instruments, who have souls, and really, really know how to capture that. Nowadays, you just get shit on the radio where it's just like big red butts and shit like that.
Yeah, popular country is an absolute corporate psyop sold to the South to like keep them invested in capital. You know what I mean? That is my hot take.
There are some exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, yeah, a lot of it's pretty much something to sell something to. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's commercialized, which, hey, another. We're not doing an album here, but yeah, the point stands. Like, the music in this is so rooted in reality, and so like, it's almost like painful to hear. Not that it sounds bad; it's all beautiful, but it's like, God, I hate this for you. You know what I mean? Because, and that's something too. He stops singing, and then he tells everybody, you know, 18 to 20 hours he goes in the mine sometimes. I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, I've pulled 15-hour shifts too, but like 18 to 20 in that kind of labor and that kind of dangerous situation is fucking crazy. He goes on to say as well, he's like, he talked to his boss one day and he was like, hey, you gotta make sure you don't take that mule somewhere dangerous. Now the mule, he can't be replaced. We have to buy a new mule, but if you die, hey, well, you can always hire somebody else, right? And basically, they're just telling him straight up, like, you're worthless. Like, you are expendable to me. And that's so fucked up. And not to disparage the mule, because I think animal lives are important too, but it's like, Jesus, like, you could just, it sets the tone for the rest of this film, kind of like how blatant it is sometimes. And it's like no one's hiding it. It's clear as day a lot of the time, the mistreatment that's there. And not even necessarily direct mistreatment, but just kind of conditions where it's like the standard operating procedure is head on into war, boys. You don't need a gun. Go, go, go. And it's like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah, I almost respect somebody more who's like, I had to buy that mule, so I have more of a vested interest in it than your life, versus the people who are like, oh, we're all one big family in this mine. Like, I kind of appreciate this guy is just being honest about what a piece of shit he is.
Yeah, and do I agree with him? Hell no. But like, I know what you're saying, where it's like, again, going back to what I said earlier, where it's like, at least if you know it's his job and he's being honest about that, then like, hey, like, listen, it's not out of evil. It's just out of like, this is what I have to do to keep my job. And yeah, to an extent, do I think you need to say no? Maybe a new job is necessary. Yes, but it makes you at least hope that they're not being malicious and that it's truly just kind of like, I have to grin and bear it, just like everybody else. So yeah, it's like you said. I understand what you were saying when you say you respect that more, because it's sometimes honesty is better, even if it's not what you want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's fucking evil either way, but like I said, at least he knows what he is. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm not saying, I mean, either way, this is a terrible statement, but I'm just saying other things about your job, like, oh, you can't get your, more hours, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, shit, fuck you too, but at least, there's a line to be drawn. But yeah, so kind of moving on from there, it starts covering a little bit more about how the Brookside mine in Brookside, Kentucky, joined the United Mine Workers of America. They voted to join, and it passed. But their parent company, Duke Power, and their subsidiary, Eastover Mining Company, is that right?
Yeah, you got it.
So they declined to sign the contract. So basically, they were like, yeah, we're not doing this. Like, even though you guys voted, like, we don't see a benefit to it from us that we can agree to. So no, we're not doing that. And so, naturally, the workers went on strike, demanding better wages and a little more control over their own lives, their own day-to-day, their safety, their freedom as far as, like, vacations and like what to do. Basically just negotiating for, wages, negotiating for, better things. And there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. Like, you can absolutely ask. I don't see a reason not to. And if you think you're worth it, like, I have no problem with the concept of the strike as long as it's with peaceful intent. Obviously, as you mentioned, it doesn't go that way here. But no, so they go on strike, and they're trying to get it through, like, hey, we need to figure out how to make this contract pass. So it goes on. There's a few more anecdotes here as far as, like, a woman recounting the loss of her husband. He died from the black lung. And then from then on, she was like, immediately from that point, she was like, yeah, I see the company as evil. Like, they're fucking terrible people, and they never cared about him, which I fucking understand. Like, if I lost my wife through a company, like, not caring about her, I would always resent that company. I would never look at it and say, you know what, it's okay. No, like, when you get it, like I said, when it's personal like that, it's hard to separate that and actually say, well, maybe the people here are doing something good, It's very difficult. It's a tough discussion because just talking about people suffering in any aspect is hard, but especially when you have to tie it to people's livelihoods, it just adds fuel to the fire. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we do see how divided the community is, because obviously this strike gets pretty wild, and there are people in the community that do not agree with this strike, do not agree with trying to join this union, and it gets crazy. Like, I mean, we're gonna touch on that, but it gets pretty bad.
Yeah, and it's hard because there's a scene, especially here in the beginning of the strike, where they start picketing and they start having the fence, and the cops show up, and they're just kind of like, all these people who know each other, like, hey, that's the Smith boy over there. Look at him. He's a cop now. He's against us. What a piece of shit. They call him a piece of shit. They're like, look at this piece of shit.
I love when they're just roasting the shit out of the cops, and the cops are just standing there like they're being filmed, so they're like, well, I can't do that much. But they're just like roasting the shit out of them. That part always gets me.
Yeah, and I've, opinions on cops aside, like, we all know there's some issues going on here, but I do not believe all cops are bad people. I absolutely do not believe that. Do I think there's some terrible bad eggs? Absolutely. But I could say that about any profession. I'm just saying, I think that it's important to note that here. I don't think anybody should be demonized for the situation they're thrown into just because of the profession they're in. There are people who in this situation are explicitly taking advantage of it, and it's disgusting. And we will see that later pretty explicitly.
And I mean, when people say like all cops are bastards, they aren't saying that like every individual was born a terrible person. It's more just saying that if you become a cop, if you engage with that system, you will become a bastard, because that is what it is. Like, and we see that these, because they're people from the same community, and they even say like, that guy is part of my family, and they have to scrap. You know what I mean? And so like that's kind of the terrible thing about it is these power systems just turn people against each other.
Yeah, and speaking of personal experience too, like, I know a guy who used to be a cop, and he's not a malicious, evil person. He was in some pretty rough situations, and that's kind of why he decided to get out of it. So, it's sometimes it's stressful, and sometimes it's just, human beings will either give into it and kind of just keep rolling with it and become part of that system, like you said, or will remove themselves, and it's tough because it's again, this is the problem there is it's tied to your livelihood. And so once you get into it, it's very difficult to make that decision to step out of it if you don't deem it appropriate. And yeah, there's some systemic problems with things, I think, as well. But, I do believe, like you said, not all cops are bastards. That saying is really, I think what a lot of people really misinterpret is that like they're attacking everybody, every cop's bad. No, there are great cops out there, but it's just that the system
we'll
can
agree
train
to disagree on this one.
Oh no, really?
Oh yeah, all cops, like, in my opinion, if you become a police officer, you are, like I said, I'm not even saying they're implicitly like their souls are corrupt or whatever, but you are becoming that agent of violence. Like, you are agreeing to do that. And there are a lot of people who get in it for good reasons.
Yes.
But that outcome is never going to be good, in my opinion. You know what I mean? And I get that there are stories about like, oh, okay, this cop like took kids on, trick-or-treating or whatever. And I'm not saying like no cop has ever done a good thing, but like, as we see in this film, they are explicitly there to, break the strike, make sure that they're not able to exercise their rights. And we do see some of them that clearly relish it. Like, there's that one scene that's just haunting where that guy is just standing there, and that cop is standing above him and just staring down at him, and just, you can tell he's just praying that this guy gives him half a reason to fuck him up.
It's just, again, like, unfortunately, those are the ones that'll set the example for everybody else, right? And like you say, the people I've known have gone into it and left it have went in with good intentions, and then they realize very quickly, like, because of what is deemed appropriate in some systems, it's just, it leads very much more to some unfortunately violent incidents and some people who, will train you that way. And again, like, if you get trained by a bad egg, yeah, you're going to turn out to be a bad egg. It's hard to change that. It's hard to change that overnight, especially. And so, I like you said, like, I want to make it clear, like, I don't think it's wise to say anybody is just inherently evil for going into it. Absolutely not. Be cognizant, though, and realize, like, there's some things that are set up to maybe not aid you, or to not aid everybody, and that some of the things are in place are pretty fucking archaic and maybe a little bit based in machismo. And I think it's important to deconstruct that, but again, I'm ranting. I don't think all cops are evil, to be clear. I do think some of them can be, and I hope to God they realize what they're doing. So, anyway, soapbox stepping down, but the point is, we see that in the movie here, where it's like, yes, there's some really shitty interactions with the police, and it, again, I understand why people will be frustrated with that. So yeah, the second part of this movie really kind of is to spend some more time with that kind of initial picket showing, kind of like how it starts off pretty tame, where it's like, they're all just standing here in a line, and then, they're all just there. It seems pretty peaceable. They even acknowledge, people driving by, like, here's a button, here's a pin, whatever, and they give them handouts. They're trying to stop the scabs from coming in. And then it becomes pretty quickly, all right, now we need to block the road. And the cops are there with the reason to say, okay, we're actually going to try to keep the road open so people can go to work. And it's, that creates the first bit of tension. And you have the people, you're obviously trying to stop the scabs, and you have the police and the company trying to open the road for the scabs so they can continue making work. And it comes to a pretty big impasse pretty quickly. So that peaceable kind of standing around with the high tension becomes physically pretty involved. Cars start coming through, and people are starting to, like, try to wall them off. Cars are slowly pushing people out of the way, and it's pretty clear it's getting a little more animosity,
Yeah, and there's that one part where it always, like, it's not funny, but, like, the striker is being held back by the cop so that the car can pass, and the car, like, hits the cop, and it doesn't, like, run him over, but it knocks him over.
Yeah.
And the striker who's holding back, like, comes over and picks him up and dusts him off, and I was like, damn, what a saint amongst men that he's like,
yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'll still help this guy.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying, where it's like, we're all people at the end of the fucking day. Like, we shouldn't view each other as fucking monsters. And that guy's a key example. But yeah, it's just tough, because you have to watch this, and like you said, all these people are family and friends, and they know each other, and it's like, oh Jesus, like, it's just like this clear divide where there's just so much friction, and everything, every bit of the conflict is centered around livelihood. Because one thing about Harlan County, what we'll talk about here, is that there's really no other good paying jobs around. This is pretty much the place to be for a job to make a living wage, to the point where some people are just like, I'm either going to improve the situation at the mine, or I'm leaving my home. And that's tough.
Yeah, and what they're getting at in that scene is they're saying, if this strike doesn't work, if this contract is not signed, if this union is not brought into this mine, they will not employ me. Like, I will have to leave my family and my home, because if we don't win, there will be no work for me here. And that is something that they talk about how the coal mines have historically kept other industries out of Appalachia that could create competitive options for workers that say, okay, well, I don't want to be a coal miner. I'm going to go do X, Y, or Z that pays equally as well. It's like, no, if you live in Harlan and you want to have a family and you want to feed them, you're probably going to be a coal miner. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And it relegates them to low wages. It forces them to accept whatever market value they deem appropriate for the area. So, again, that's kind of the first overview we see of the actual picketing process. So, again, we get some, what I mentioned before, there's some pretty interesting testimonies from both sides. It's just kind of getting some quick, interviews of people. And, there's some guys who are like, yeah, we're fighting for the good fight, blah, blah, blah. And then there's some people who's like, these people are communists. Those people are communists. These guys are communists. I'm just like, all right, guys, like, chill. Like again, like, it's just a bunch of finger pointing and name calling on both sides. And it's like, all right, like, that's not solving shit. But I thought it was funny because there's just so many interviews where people were just like saying the same shit. And they're like asking like, what do you think of this? And it's like, oh, it's a communist. It's like, what do you think of this? It's like, oh, it's a communist. It's like, what do you think of that? And he's like, well, they run the country. It's a communist. It's like, what?
Yeah, they're just like, unions are ruining this country. And it's like, my man, they want to get you a better wage. Like, that's all they're trying to do.
It's wild. And you're allowed to have opinions on that. That's fine. But it's like, yeah, whatever. I don't know. It's just tough because it's like, it's that blind name calling, which is so evident not only in this particular instance, but it's kind of echoing, at least in my experience, American politics, where you have, we're the right and we're the left and we fucking hate each other. And it's like, that is so archaic and stupid.
When like something like this should not, like, in my opinion, people should not view it as like this political thing of like, okay, I don't support unions because I'm a Republican and historically Republicans haven't supported unions. It's like, no, you should think about this from your socioeconomic background. Like, is it going to benefit you financially to be in a union? And the data says yes. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and I mean, like, I understand why that's such a political issue. And it's because the powers that be have made it that way. They want it to be that way. They want you to feel that way. But yeah, it's just so sad to see this, I mean, what is clearly a tight-knit community being torn apart and, I mean, driven to violence.
Right.
Because like you said, their one livelihood, their one source of income has become this battleground, this political battleground that it really shouldn't have to be,
Right, and because of the situation they're in, where they're all living in the town and relying on it so much, you can't, like, work-life balance is so important, and when that's the case, and they're controlling your life as much as they are, you can't not be involved in the conflict. You are either, and that's why I can understand, where she was coming from in that song, which is like, you have to pick a side. It's like they don't get to come home and forget about the job and forget about the workplace. They come home and they live in facilities provided by the workplace and provided by it and everything about it. So it's
well, thankfully, like, at this point, it's not a company town. So, like,
oh, okay.
Yeah. So that was abolished in, like the 30s, 40s and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't that severe, but still the sway that because we look at these dried up company towns where the just for example, where my family is from, it's not a coal company town, but it's still an old company town, and the company was, it just closed in the 70s once the EPA was formed, and they're like, hey, you can't dump toxic sludge into the river anymore. And instead of being like, oh, okay, how do we run this company ethically, they're like, fuck it, we're going to close it and everybody's going to lose their jobs because that means that we can't make literally as much money as possible.
But I want to be an X-Man, Dad.
Yeah. So it's like, even though it's not technically a town owned by the company at this point in the 70s, because like I said, this is when the town my family is from, the company left. It wasn't like the houses were owned by the company anymore, but the economy was essentially still run by that company because that's where everybody had to work. So when that left, the town just dies because there's nothing to do there anymore. Like, there's just no money in the town. Like, there's no way to make money, I mean, I think if this is okay with you, I think an interesting direction we could go with that is we see the importance of the wives on the picket line who,
that's my next section.
Yeah. So, like, they obviously are not minors. They don't work for this company. But because it is the, like I said, it's the economic center of this town, and it's the only place that their husbands can get jobs, they are just as invested in this strike as the people who actually work for the company, the miners.
Right. And that's actually, so going into that, something I wanted to go over as well. the support of the UMWA contract from the wives is immense, and like they are looking at this contract, this agreement, the success of this contract is just a change for everybody, not just their husbands, monetarily, but their home life and the quality of life for their kids. There's one woman who's explaining to her daughter, I think, and she's like, if the union pulls through for your daddy, he's gonna have a big old bathtub and tons of hot water. And again, we look at that today.
As she's like washing this kid in essentially a sink, and it's just like, it's heartbreaking.
It's not even a sink, it's just a bucket.
Yeah. And it's like, it's just so heartbreaking because it's like, that is their only chance. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that is why this fight is, and they even say it. There's, during one of the meetings, they tell them, like, the reason they are fighting us so hard is because this is, for us, life-changing money. Like, this is a big deal. Like, we have to fight for this.
Right. And so the women really play a pivotal role in supporting that. And of course, like, to them, it's such a big amount. It may not be nationwide or, to some people, and we'll get more into that later. But yeah, so these ladies are out there, they're picketing in the morning. There's a really great good scene where these scab cars are coming through, and these ladies are like, all right, you know what? Fuck it. We let one come through. Let's lay down in front of the next one. And so these ladies just lay down in the road in front of this car. Like, this guy could very easily just, floored it and killed like 7 or 8 ladies all at once. And I'm just like, Jesus God. Like, it's starting to get to the point where it's like, martyrdom almost. And that's how fervently they wanted to support their husbands, because they know the shit their husbands had to deal with at their jobs. And they wanted their time to be worth it. And it's so amicable.
In that section, there is another really funny shit talking moment where the police are literally carrying these women to the squad cars because they're like, I'm just gonna lay here, I'm not gonna move. Like, if you're gonna take me, you're gonna have to carry me. And this guy just goes, he's like, God, look at him manhandling the women now. And it's just like, God, just every chance to just fucking roast these guys.
It's fucking silly. And it's just like, you have to look at it with a little bit of like a fucking a macro overview of like, what the fuck are we doing here, guys? Like, we're laying down in front of cars, like nobody here, like the amount of time we were wasting just bickering, it's crazy. But anyway, so these women, they're going to jail. They're all having, it's almost like this very just like nonchalant trip to jail. Where like for so many people, that would be so traumatizing. And they're just sitting there in the jail cells like, yep, I'll do it again tomorrow. I sure as hell will. And then they're just like, all right, so tomorrow we'll do this shit again. And then the next day we'll do it again. And it's like, they will literally like ride or die for their fucking husbands. And these women are bad fucking ass. Not to say because they're loyal or their allegiance is why, but these women are so strong, and I think it's such an awesome representation of them. It really shows it well. It's just, and there's parts in the film where the men are just like, God, they're upstaging us, and we're the ones who work here. Like they're fighting harder than us. Like there's a scene later on we'll get to that really shows that, but they are just so fervent in supporting their husbands, and that is something that is incredible. Relationship, married or not, that's just incredible. No matter what the situation, that you're able to put yourself on the line like that for somebody else, that's just amazing.
And there's one woman who even she even says like, oh yeah, my husband doesn't work at the mine. He he's retired because he was injured in the mine. But she's like, but this is still my fight. This is still our fight. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's a community. It's not just your direct surroundings, but the people down the street from you, the people who've been your neighbors for years, like the people who you know and care about. And hey, that's awesome to fight for them and not in a physical sense, but it's awesome to show up for them and, root for them and try to make a change for the better. And that's the thing. It's like it's hard to make change. It really is, in any aspect, let alone in this situation. But yeah, these ladies are constantly proving themselves to be just like the fucking champions of this town. They're awesome. There's one lady later on, who she's in a courtroom, and I think the judge is going over like, hey, this is why we need to do this. This is the stuff we need to put in place. We need to kind of put more restrictions on how you guys are performing these pickets. And a woman speaks up and she says, "This law is made to help the company and not the worker, and you know it." And so she's just like, I am abhorrently appalled that we even have to consider, putting limitations on each other's whereabouts like we are now, because it's like, we have a right to assemble. We have a right to be here. And, she's very fervent in the fact that's like, how dare you take that away from me after everything we've all fought for, especially considering, like you said, the bloody Harlan incidents. And it's like, they're almost negating the death and the strife that happened, 40 years ago. And that's a big slap in the face to a lot of those people, especially their descendants,
Yeah, and they explicitly say, like, we knew this was how it was going to go because the judge has, economic interest with that mine. Like, he makes money off of it. And another court official, their son works for the mine. He is taking pictures of all the strikers so that they can be blacklisted. So, they have political and economic interests, and they're like, we know how it's going to go. Like, we know that the law isn't going to be there for us.
Right. And it's something that it's hard to see, but again, it really just shows how the women in this town just tooth and nail will fight. So really interesting. And that kind of is a good segue into the next portion of where I've kind of covered really how this is being affected on a more large scale of the country. And there's a really cool, interesting things here that deal with New York specifically. So because of the situation that they're in Harlan County, they actually make a trip. They're like, okay, well, we have to bring this attention not just to the company now. We have to bring the attention to the company's stakeholders and the people who trade on Wall Street and explain to them what's going on, what we're doing, that we are striking, and that now because of all these things and their refusal to cooperate, the stock is not reliable and you should be very wary about buying it. And so that they go up to Wall Street, these miners, and it's this crazy, interesting fish out of water scenario where they're all in New York in their mining, digs. And it's like, I mean, obviously they're just completely out of place. There's people in suits running around with like, fancy shoes, and like everyone here is like dressed to the nines. And these guys are in their overalls, like badasses, just walking around like, hey, listen to me, please. I have something to say. And they're not being malicious. They're just, trying to just explain what's going on. But this is a really great scene. They're talking to this cop, and he's just sitting there asking like, hey, where are you from? Like, what are you doing? And he's talking to the cop, and the cop asks like, how much you make? And he's like, I think he says $6 an hour, and the cop goes, that's literally nothing. He goes, you're fighting for nothing. You know that, right? Because like $6-7 an hour, who cares? And like, I don't think he's being malicious in that fact. He's just trying to explain like, you can go somewhere else and be better off. And, but the miners are like, nah, man, this is my home. And that's a big deal to me that we fight and actually make that change. And it's this really kind of jarring juxtaposition where this cop is just like, I don't think he's malicious at any point from what I see in the videos at least. But he's just kind of like, they really need to listen to you because God, like, if that's what you're fighting for, you deserve at least that. And I just thought that was such an interesting interaction. And it's like, they're out here warning these traders. They're talking to all the actual day workers on the stock market, and they're saying, you need to listen to us, and they're listening. They're talking like, hey, yeah, and they're replying to the miners and saying, with what you've told me, I won't buy any more stock in Duke Power. Whether they did or not, who knows? But yeah, at least it seems like they're reaching someone's ears.
Yeah, and when he's talking to that cop, he just tells this dude a really harrowing statistic, which he just like points to a street light, and he's like, people don't realize that light burning over there, 1 man a day dies so that electricity can flow. And back then, like statistically, 1 man a day did die in the mine. You know what I mean? And that's just terrible.
It is, and it's just like, I guess, unfortunately, I guess the mentality of back then is out of sight, out of mind. And I think that's partially why they went up there as a group is, hey, like, no one's down here, covering this with cameras and news crews and all this. Let's go take it to them and make sure we're seen. And it's like, it's sad because I'm just like, guys, like the cops said, I can almost guarantee like the living wage in New York is much higher than the living wage in Harlan County. And to the cop, he's like, how are you even managing with that low of a wage? He says very blatant. He's very, very blatant. He's like, you do not understand. Like, I am a low. He lives like, I'm a beat cop. I have a pretty cushy job. And he was like, I make more than that. And I don't have the right to. You work in hard ass conditions. Like, you are dying every day you go to work. And he's like, well, I don't know about that. Like, and the miner's like almost like kind of refuting that point. And it's like, oh man, like, I see where the cop's coming from, but it's like, it's also cool to see how passionate these guys are about, like, it's not even that they hate the job. They just want better conditions and better recognition,
Yeah. And I mean, in these communities, because people, people have studied this, like, okay, why did Appalachia, and it, happened in like the early 2000s, like, why did Appalachia flip from being, pretty consistently blue into, as a region, it's gone red since the early 2000s. And it's because so many of these communities, like I said, were completely built around coal mining, that, that's all their, grandfathers and great-grandfathers and all this stuff had ever done. That's all they had ever done. That's, what their community was built around, and that's what they have. So now that, and obviously I am not, condemning anyone who's like, okay, we should get away from coal, because we should get away from coal. But if that's all you have, and the Democrats are like, okay, we need to go to renewable energy, I understand the knee-jerk reaction, or not even the knee-jerk reaction, just the realization that nothing else is going to come. So it's like, we have to hold on to this, because if, we don't have coal mining, we're going to have nothing. And obviously, I think it's on, like, other industries need to be brought into the region. It shouldn't just be like, okay, we're going to die by coal. But I understand that, because, like, who is going to help? You know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of, in my opinion, why a lot of Appalachian communities have kind of flipped and, started voting Republican. And it's because, like, that is the only thing they have. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So the party that's like, yeah, let's keep mining coal, of course they're going to be like, okay, let's go with them. And I mean, they're, like I said, it's horribly sad that, I think they're right, that nobody's going to try and bring anything else into those communities, because they've extracted the value that they want. So, why would they,
Yeah, and that's a whole, it's, the energy system here in the U.S. is there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to look at, and so much of it is tied up with socioeconomic, ownership. I think there's a statistic that shows out here where it's like 70% of all coal mines and works are owned by oil companies, which seems a bit of a conflict of interest to me, but hey, it's one of those things where it's like, we all know, but you don't think about it when you see coal. It's owned by oil, but it's like you said, there's such a monopoly on the wage and the workforce in that area where they won't allow anything else to show up, and so it forces them to stay in that area as a low cost of low labor force. Sorry, low wage labor. Excuse me. Low wage labor force.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to move on to another section here, specifically dealing with a mine in West Virginia that exploded. Are you familiar with this much?
Yeah. So I had read about it before. I didn't make a note of it, the name of the mine, because one time I looked up why it exploded, and I've forgotten. But the film does make a note of, like, okay, last year this mine was inspected 19 times. 19 times they found that it was unsafe, but they were allowed to stay open, and they were just told, like, okay, fix it by the next time we come. And they just never did anything. And,
Eesh.
why would they? Because nobody was going to make them do anything. And,
Yeah.
of course, the mine fucking blew up. And, over 100 men they dug their own graves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is what this was fucking shocking to me, because it says that only 4 men survived, and I think it said there were 78 others who were trapped, and the decision was made pretty quickly, where it's like, all right, they're gone, fuck it, seal the mine, and they just sealed the mine. And I'm like, what the fuck? There's people in there, aren't there?
Yeah, they made the announcement. Like, one of the wives says, they made the announcement that if a second explosion occurs, they're going to seal the mine. And she was like, unfortunately, it happened. And then it shows them sealing the mine, and it's just heartbreaking. And the saddest part about it to me is it shows all these, they've built a little, like, memorial kind of thing by the road. It's just a kind of a frame that people can lay wreaths on. And what's so sad is these people are there to mourn, and they're clearly heartbroken, but it's like they can't even cry. Like, they're all just standing there looking at it, like, because they're just like, you know what I mean? Like, what else,
Yeah, and also they're all women, and mostly women, and it's because all the men died.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy shit, it's just fucking hard. Like, so many, such a large portion of that town disappeared within one day. And it's like, holy shit, how can we, like, be okay with that?
And yeah, the heartbreaking thing, like I said, they almost just look resigned to it. They're just like I said, it's like they can't even cry. It's so sad. Every time I see that part, I'm just like, Jesus, like that. It's just, like I said, the only word for it is heartbreaking. I don't know how else to describe it.
And one of the older ladies makes a comment too, and she says, I've seen this time and time again. As long as there's greed, there will be tragedy. Which I thought was just a really powerful line. And unfortunately true. So many bad things happen because there's money's involved. And that's the whole crux of this. It's just all about money. I mean, it's cliche as hell, but yeah, money is the root of all evil. It just fucking is. Because it allows us to rule each other as humans. And I think that's a much bigger argument you could look at, where it's, it's social constructs of money and how they're problematic and how they're unregulated and what have you. But you see it time and time again, where it's like somebody wants more power. And how do you get more power? More money. And then if you have more money, you want to keep your power and money. Because unfortunately, that's just human nature. And that's something, too, my wife and I talked about, was playing 100% devil's advocate. If you do not know how hard it is to get by a minimum wage, if you do not know, and you've been raised and you just don't know better, unfortunately, most people are just going to take that, well, I'm used to the standard of living, whatever it costs to the other guy. And that's fucking sad. And so you want to hope people will rise above that and say, I was born rich. If I'm rich, I'm going to make sure other people who aren't so lucky are having help at least. That rarely occurs. At least in my context of American socioeconomics. What happens more so is that's more likely to happen if the person who becomes rich comes from nothing, so to speak. No, a poor upbringing, I'll say, economically speaking. That is much more likely to be recirculated back into people who need it once that wealth is had. Unfortunately, most people, in my experience, not true for everybody, who are born or into money with a silver spoon, so to speak, do not recirculate that to those who could honestly, truthfully need it. So yeah, it's tough, but that was something my wife and I really had a conversation about because of this. It was like, wow, this is such a good example of that, where it's like, you really, I mean, it's the old saying, the value of $1 is worth more than any amount of money.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the, not to get on my soapbox, but I think that's, one thing that frustrates me so much about a lot of working class people is the rich know, they understand the class divisions, I think, in ways that a lot of working class people won't allow themselves to understand, where they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to fuck over the workers because that's how I keep my status. And so many of the workers are just like, well, I'm going to let Elon Musk have billions and billions of dollars because that's the way it is. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, it doesn't have to be that way.
It's just tough because it's like I said, you want to assume the best in people or they're going to help out. Because if you think about it, like, I always make the parallel to, think about an interstate. Say there's a homeless man on an interstate. How many cars pass by that homeless man a day? You think thousands, tens of thousands, probably. If 10% of people gave that man $1, he would have a place to live for a month, and it's $1. I'm not saying again. Everyone should understand that it's $1's $1. Sure, you don't just throw it away for nothing, but like just a tiny act of kindness. If everyone could do that, then yeah, we could really help each other. But again, like I'm saying, unfortunately, this kind of shows like if you come from that and you don't make the cognitive decision to help, then you're just perpetuating the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of what this movie is showing that these people understand, and it's also maybe trying to show other people, is that... And so, the last song that plays in this movie is by Hazel Dickens. And there's a line, and it's called... the line of it is, ain't no way they can ever keep us down. And it's, just about how, working people need to stick together. And I think that's really the point of this movie, is it's like, okay, the rich are sticking together. They are always acting in their best interests and the best interests of their socioeconomic class. And it's just like, so workers need to do the same. Like, we don't, it's a tragedy that the people who are shooting at the strikers, as we will get to soon, are also working class people.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's just so hard.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of the real push of this movie, is it's just like, you need to see the game. Like, you know what I mean? And that's what I meant when I was like, look, this whole unionization, all this stuff, this shouldn't be a political issue. Like, this shouldn't be left and right. This should be workers and non-workers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's just in the workers' interest. It just is.
And the money game makes people who are friends and family literally shoot at each other. And it's like, Jesus. It's like you get so blinded to the day by day and the financials of things. It's just, you forget that shit. Where it's like, we're all fucking people. And I say that 1,000 times, but we are. It's just, it breaks my heart. And this movie, I'll be honest, was depressing in a lot of ways. And that's, I think it's because it's trying to show me and try to show the audience like how important, these things are that have happened, and to learn from them. Not even, I don't even think it's even so much as like oh, boo-hoo, look what happened. Because yes, it's tragic. But I also thought the movie was kind of like, look at this and think about it and apply it to your life and, what you value, and understand, like, don't let money turn people against each other, no matter what their background is. And that was kind of the overall takeaway I had, was like, again, like that woman had mentioned, as long as there's greed, there will be tragedy. And that's true at every level, not just in like this one mine, but in life in general. Warfare, political power, everything. You're the fucking, like, TCGs, trading card games. Like, it's just, it's everything. And it's unfortunate that we don't deconstruct it a little more, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that a really good example in the film that it shows, and like I said, it's just so explicit. Like, there's not a narrator or anything, because there doesn't need to be. It shows, right after it shows about this mine explosion and everything, if I have it ordered correctly in my head, it shows all these miners in a clinic that they can't breathe because they have black lung. And the doctor is saying like, yeah, these guys will start to show symptoms, and they keep working because they know that they need to get bad enough to where they can actually get disability benefits, because their options are to work or to get disability. So they knowingly go into that mine knowing that they're going to get black lung because it is their only option.
Yeah.
And he talks about how, because of their research, Australia has made these mines safer, and they have gotten rid of black lung. Like, this is not a problem in Australia. He talks about how in
Mhm.
all these different countries in Europe, how safe the mines are. And then it just hard cuts to like a big executive for Duke Power. And he's like, there is no connection between
I
mine.
we watched that scene and we both went, "What?"
Yeah,
We just like, "What are you talking about?"
yeah, so it
Like,
shows these poor men that can't breathe, and they're like on all these breathing treatments, and then it just hard cuts to this guy in a suit, and he's like, "Yeah, there's no connection between working in a mine and getting black lung." It's like, their lungs are black. What the fuck are you talking about? Of course,
coal
there's a
is
connection of that in the
it's
coal mine.
yeah, it's like it's coal. That's why it's black. Like, what the fuck? It's crazy. No, that was wild. And and that's something too. Kind of talking about press conferences and like statements. There's a bad one earlier too, where they ask. It might be the same guy. I'm not sure, but they ask somebody. They say, hey, what do you think about these wives out here? They don't have any stake in the game. Why are they fighting so hard for this? Like, what do you think on them? Like, what should we do for them? And he went, well, I would be quite ashamed if my wife did this kind of behavior. And I'm just like, you'd be ashamed for your wife to fight for you? Like, what do you mean? I'm just like, how can you like sit there? Oh man, it grinded my gears. And I was just like, I can't believe that somebody would say that like about their spouse. Like it. My wife would do anything for me, and I know that.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh man, how can you ever fucking shame someone for that? And even if you don't agree with them, you can't shame someone for fucking fighting for someone that they love. And so going back to what you said, yeah, this statement is like, it's pretty explicitly like, oh, there's no problem here, boys, don't worry. And it's like, well. But guys, look at the. Just ask one doctor who treats them. One person's all you need to ask. And like I said, that doctor in that clinic, the Black Lung Clinic, was like, "Yeah, I see this shit every day. Like they will not. I won't see them until it's too late, and even then, they just go back to work." And it's like, fuck, like, So yeah, we see a couple more things there. Going more into the kind of union side of things, you start to see too, it's not just the coal companies. There's some pretty big dissonance in the union as well. And I think the leader, Tony Boyle, is starting to kind of lose respect, even though he's been president for a while. He's president of the United Mine Workers of America, and he's starting to realize, like, people are starting to realize, okay, maybe we don't want him anymore. Maybe he's not really representing us correctly. And so he's got a big rival, and his name is Yablonsky, and Yablonsky is very critical of him and is kind of vying for his position, campaigning for the president for the election of the union. All of a sudden, Yablonsky just ends up, dead, wife and daughter, all three of them dead in their house.
Yeah.
And it's pretty quickly identified that, well, this is obviously an act of politics from Boyles, and we do later find out that Boyles is convicted of the conspiracy for that, and he is charged with that and convicted. So some justice there, but it just goes to show you, like, it's such a hard. It's no organization is clean. Like, the union's got stuff going on inside of it. The coal companies are obviously, taking advantage of people. And it's like, it just goes to show, whenever people have power of any type, it will corrupt absolutely. It's just fucking sad. So after all of that, later on, I believe it's Miners for Democracy is formed.
Yeah. And I just, before you move on from that, once again, it's a Hazel Dickens song, and it's talking about the Yablonsky murders, and her line is, get that dirty trash, get that union back on solid ground, get that dirty trash that's keeping the working man down. And she's right. It's like, yeah, unions are supposed to obviously serve the workers they represent. If they don't, you need to get them the fuck out. You know what I mean? Like, you need to make change.
Exactly.
but yeah, so I love that part. And then the funeral for Yablonsky, it shows his sons, and his sons are,
Oh,
I mean, I just respect them so much because they've like faced this tragedy, and
yeah.
they're like, but this, at the end of the day, this is about the miners. Like, they killed our father, but our father died for the miners. And he's like, you know, my brother is gonna carry, my brother and my cousins are gonna carry my mother to her grave. I'm gonna carry my sister, but we're gonna leave, the miners to carry my father because that's who he
Right.
died for. And I'm like, damn, like that is, once again, I'm just like, that is heartbreaking that these guys have gone through such a tragedy, and they're still just like, our father would have wanted us to fight for the miners.
Because I'm going to be honest with you, and this is going to be controversial probably, and I haven't noted this as well. No, and I mean no disrespect to anybody who's fought for any kind of, rights or work. I don't want to take any of that away from them. This is me, in my personal opinion. I would never put my life on the line for my workplace. I cannot in any instance imagine for myself doing that. And it's like if I were in this situation, like I would just move the hell away. Like I'm not gonna die for it. You know what I mean? And that's, I think a lot of people would view me as a coward for saying that, but at the same point, it's like all I'm saying in that is I can never imagine myself being brave enough to die for this kind of rights for people. You know what I mean? And it's just I personally can never do it.
Yeah. And, obviously, I think that like a lot of them are very brave. I do think that when things get that bad, it is because you don't have an option. Like,
Sure.
I think that this fight gets so bad because they don't have the option to leave. Like, you know what I mean? They don't have an education. They were raised and everybody just knew, okay, I'm going to work in the mine because it's the only option. So they didn't get an education, or that wasn't available to them. They don't have the money to move. You know what I mean? They don't have the like, and I'm not downplaying the courage, but I do think that you would maybe surprise yourself if you're like, well, I have no option. It is starve or it is fight.
I guess the timeline too, in the situation around me being, that's a whole other thing. But I see what you're saying there. It's one of those things like, yeah, people surprise each other, I think, when they're put into a tough situation. So yeah, there's credit to that as well. So again, it's just hard for me to conceptualize dying in any aspect for something else, but for my job especially,
Yeah. And I think that, I definitely wouldn't frame it as they're like dying for their job as much as they're dying for their futures, for their families' futures, and for their community's futures. And
Sure.
there's in one of the union meetings when stuff is getting, because like from this point on, it shows about the Yablonsky murder, and then it kind of goes back to the strike.
Right.
And this is when it starts to really escalate. Like we see it get worse and worse. And they say like, what you're doing here is going to make your children's lives better, and it's going to make your grandchildren's lives better. And I think that really is the heart of it, is like, they're not fighting because they just want to have a better job. It's because, they want to be safe, but also they want a future for their family,
Yeah, and that kind of goes into that's kind of where I'm coming from too, is like, at what point does that become blind optimism? Not to discredit them, but that's something you have to consider. It's like, but, and it's something we'll get to later. It's like, yes, spoiler, they do end up getting this contract to work, but then a few years later, they're still in a bad situation, and so it's like you're making small steps, and it's amicable, but it's like, oh gosh, like, you almost have to look at like and say, when will it be fair? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, unfortunately, I mean, you do just always have to fight before it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's, unless you fight for it, it's never going to be fair, you know? And even in other parts of the country or other industries where, there are more fair labor practices, it's because they do have stronger unions, you know what I mean? And they've, they have the political will, the people have the political will to make sure that it doesn't get to that point. Whereas, in Appalachia, it's just been exploited so long, and rights have been kept from people that to get to that point, you kind of have to fight. Unfortunately,
I understand that argument for sure. It's
just tragic. It's tragic to watch. It really is.
Yeah, and that's something they mentioned at the very end of the film too. We'll get to where it's like, we did it, we made it. Then it's like, but now the economy's changed and we're actually behind again. And it's like, fuck. It's like, well, geez.
Yeah.
And it just gets harder. So it's, and we'll get to that. But going back to where we were, as far as, like you said, the kind of more of the picket scenes. One thing that does happen, Arnold Miller is elected for the president of United Mine Workers. And he takes over. And people are pretty positive about him at first. They seem to respect him pretty well. They seem to understand that he's, for the people, by the people. And that's what he's kind of given off, at least. So far so good with him. We'll go back to him later, but focusing more on the picket scene. Like you said, it comes back to that. It gets pretty rough. So now they're hiring people with guns to come and kind of just threaten the strikers. To the point where they're literally, pulling guns out and pointing it at people and, starting to really just scare people and intimidate them, which never ends well. So lots of threatening there, lots of scary things happening there. Again, people are referencing at this point in the movie the bloody Harlan tragedies and echoing like, hey, it's happening again. This is the sign. Like, this is what we've seen this before. We know it's happening next. Because of all this stuff happening, I mean, obviously, it's somewhat effective. And people are starting to thin out the picket. And they're just kind of like, people are starting to go, okay, no, let's second get this. Like, and people have that thought, we're like, I'm not going to die for this. Like, there's a gun involved. Like, I'm not going to die. All we have is switchblades. They have guns and sticks and weapons. We're outnumbered here. We're outclassed here. No matter what our, ideals are. And there's some dissonance in the group. They start to become, the Union supporters start to become pretty upset with one another. Get a little personal. And there's a really great line by Sudie Cruisenberry, who I think is later elected the president for the women in that group there. And she says, I'm not after any man. I'm not after any, marriage. I'm after a contract, because at the end of the day, I'm raising 2 boys, and that's all I give a shit about. And people, start cheering and clamoring for her in this big argument.
And this is in response to these 2 women who have gotten in a fight. And one of them is like very outspoken, and we've seen her a lot throughout the documentary because she is very, like I said, she's very outspoken. And they like start making these personal digs at each other, where one of them's just like, well, I hear that you're out here trying to get with all these other men and like all these, women's men. And she's just like, well, I hear you're an alcoholic. And then she's just, like you're saying, she's like, I don't, this other woman comes in and she's just like, this isn't about any of this bullshit. This is about a contract. And once again, it's just talking about like, this is about the future of our children. This is about the future of our community,
Yeah, and I was waiting on Jerry Springer to come in and then break up the fight with his bodyguards.
fucking Steve Wilkos hands them like some water to throw at each other.
Listen here, I know you support the union, but you gotta take a step back, all right? No, but yeah, I mean, everyone's becoming really passionate, and like you said, people are starting to, their resolve is starting to kind of falter a little bit, but they kind of rally back a little bit more, but unfortunately, because of the introduction of guns, other people are getting guns and starting to bring more and more guns to these meetings at the picket fence every morning. Picket line every morning.
Kind of what, if I remember correctly, the reason that they rally back and everybody rallies together is because they, the strike breakers have a machine gun and they open fire And there's that really chaotic scene of them firing at the strikers, and a guy comes over and just starts beating the shit. I mean, a lot of people are getting beaten up, and the film crew, like the woman who's directing it and the cameraman, they get the shit kicked out of them. Yeah. And they are able to capture an image of Basil Collins, who is the lead strikebreaker, and he's just driving by in his truck with his pistol drawn pointed at him.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. And so people, again, in response to that, because I think they even fire shots off, and like they don't, I don't know if anybody gets shot that way. There's once there's shooting happening, it gets really scary, right? And so it's in response to that, of course, people start bringing guns on both sides more and more. And it just becomes a standoff every morning and every day. And it's like, and eventually it gets to the point where they're having one of the standoffs, and they're asking, there's an interview with one of the supporters, and they ask, you scared? And he goes, well, hell yeah, I'm scared. Aren't you? And she's like, yeah. And he goes, and she's like, do you think they're going to shoot at us today? And he was like, yo, hell yeah, they shot at us yesterday. Hell if I know. And it's just like, Jesus, like, God, you shouldn't have to fucking feel that way. And so basically, they pull back up, the strikebreakers, and when they pull up, the Union guys are trained on him with 3 pistols behind this car, and they're literally aiming down the sights at him as he gets out of his truck. And then the strikebreaker gets out of his truck, and he's just holding a pistol like, yeah, I got mine too. What of it? And so it's wild. It's just really just like, how is this become the norm in this little small town over like a 9 or 10 month span? It's fucking wild. And so you start seeing him kind of walk closer to him, and obviously this is kind of this like, so all it takes is one person to fucking make a dumb mistake, and it's going to get real bad real quick. And so there's a lot of tension, and the sheriff is nearby. And so the ladies come up to the sheriff and say, hey, we have a warrant for his arrest, the lead strikebreaker's arrest, because he shot a gun at people and literally beat the shit out. Like, everybody beat the shit out of us. Like, this is bad. Here's a warrant for his arrest. And the sheriff says, and I shit you not, well, someone's going to have to pay me that $7 arrest fee right now. And everyone's like, are you fucking serious? And they're just looking at him. And he's like, I need it now before I can do anything. It's part of my job. And they're like, all right, here's fucking $7. And then everyone's just like, okay, now go get his ass.
The way they just throw it at him, they're like, here's your $7.
Here's your fucking money.
And one of them is just like, I'll give you $100. Just do your fucking job.
And he's like, well, this is my part of my job, is taking the money. It's like, jeez. But anyway, he very calmly walks over to the guy in his truck. And everyone's like, yeah, he's going to go get him. Well, he's going to go arrest him. And he's on camera, mind you. And he walks up to the guy, and he's like, hey, listen, like, you know what I got to do here. And, why I got to do it. So, and he doesn't cuff him. He doesn't take him in. He says, why don't you drive yourself down to the station for me? And it's just like complete refusal to actually like acknowledge in public, like, that there's an issue. And so the ladies even call him out. They're like, you're just going to let him drive down there himself? You know damn well how that's going to look to us and to the people who are supporting us. And he's like, listen, lady, I'm just doing my job. And he kind of backtracks. He's like, hey, listen, you've been a problem too. So he's like, you can't say shit. And so it's just this kind of like, there's people taking advantage of the situation. And I'm just like, oh, fucking, how, it's so hard to see that. And so frustrating. But
it's that same woman who's really kind of outspoken, and there's a really iconic scene in it that like happens when everybody's starting to get guns, and she pulls a pistol out of her bra, and and the woman, the director of the film, is like, you shouldn't store a gun like that. Like, what are you doing? You shouldn't carry a gun, and you shouldn't carry it in your bra. And she's like, well, it has a safety. And she's like, well, still, you shouldn't, like, that's not safe. And It cracks me up every time she goes, well, just shoot my titty off. And then she just starts dying laughing.
Oh God.
And she's joking, but then she gets serious and she's like, I would be crazy to not have a gun right now. She's like, you've seen what they're doing.
Yeah. And basically, for what it's worth, they take that as a small victory at that moment where, the guy just drives off, but hey, it's something.
All the scabs turn around because they have blockaded the road, and the sheriff's like, you got to move the car. And they're like, arrest him and we will. And so, I mean, I obviously I don't know, but it's kind of implied that for that day, the mine does not work.
Yeah. And so they take it as a small victory. Everyone kind of rallies around that. And, I think the turnout that day specifically was like wildly high compared to like recently. And so they had a ton of people out there. And so it was just kind of like, it ended up working. And a lot of people are like, see, this is what happens when we rally together, which is inspiring. But there's also some people who are very critical. And like, 'cause actually some of the higher ups, and I think even what's his face, Arnold Miller, the guy.
Yeah, Miller.
He shows up himself, and people are like, "Holy shit! This is the first time anybody from the upper brass of the union's been here." And they're like, "Well, this it's actually going well for us." But then pretty quickly they're like, "But is this?" Like, some people are critical. They're like, "Is this enough? All we're doing is just fucking blocking the road. Like, is this enough? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't help us." And
yeah, it shows the. Are you talking about the part where all the UMW miners from around the country come and have a parade?
Yes.
Yeah. So they have that big parade. Miller shows up, and they're like, "Wow, this is the first time that the president of the UMWA has gone to a place that's like actively striking." And then it cuts to that kid, and every time he's on camera, I'm like, oh fuck yeah, I love this kid. And he's just like, we didn't do enough. He's like, we had, hundreds, if not thousands of union miners in this town, and what did we do? And they're like, well, what do you mean? What should you have done? He's like, we should have marched to the mine. We should have told them what we were about when we had those numbers. And he's like, and we should have expropriated their machine gun. And it's like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to disagree with him because, like, if you have those numbers, why wouldn't you use them? That is the point of the union. And if they're shooting a machine gun at you, you kind of need to do some stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then so it kind of, yeah, and it's tough because, like, I understand his frustration where it's like, at the end of the day, like, there's still no resolution to the contract. This doesn't solve anything. It's just going to probably boil over again. And so tragedy kind of strikes. Basically, I think during one of the pickets, one of the lines, there's a scab that ends up shooting somebody in the back of the head just because things boil over. And I believe the name is Lawrence Jones is the name of the man who's shot. He dies.
He's a young guy.
Like 17 or 18 maybe. And he passes away, sadly. And, pretty quickly everyone's mourning him. And that kind of is the catalyst, it would seem, at least on paper, that really pushed them to actually sit down and negotiate the union and the company and say, what can we do to actually stop people from dying now? Because now there's blood. And it's going to get bad, kind of like it did in the 30s. Not to say there wasn't blood before, but it's like now it's like that was a murder, And he basically is heralded as the reason that this was passed, and he died for a reason, and everyone views him as this kind of martyr of change, which is a wonderful way to honor somebody. But it's just so sad, and it's like there's this. I have a note here where it's like it's this very, you could tell that there's this very deep generational anger and simultaneous sadness, and it's weirdly beautiful, and it's like, I hate that this happened. I absolutely hate it, but the fact that we're able to look at somebody and honor them and love them like that, and it's just like it's so cathartic in a way, you know what I mean? To say, look at how human beings can truly be nice to each other in light of what this terrible shit that's been happening in this town, you know? And it's hard to watch. It really is. There's a scene where the mother or the grandmother goes to the funeral service, and she just faints and starts breaking down crying. It's so heart-wrenching.
I can't get through that part. Like, I'm tearing up thinking about it, but it's his mother, and he's left behind a 16-year-old wife and a child, and it's his mother, and she's like crying and losing her mind, and it in the captions it just says inaudible because they can't. I guess they couldn't understand what she was saying. But if you listen, she just says, "I can't leave him. I can't leave him," and she oh man is like falling into the casket because she's like, I can't do this. And these guys, like, you're right, they have to carry her away because she just like, it's so sad. It is so hard to watch. Like, I can't imagine that.
And that's something too where it's like. This movie is so depressing in a lot of ways, but it really highlights a lot of things about like the human condition and just kind of how we hold each other in such esteem and how passionate we can be. It's such a nice overview of how human emotion can dictate those financial decisions and dictate those economic changes, because at the end of the day, whether we know it or not, our emotions impact every single choice we make. And I think I think that's something that this does really well, is highlight that and say, how can this be, again, used as an example to show what different emotions can do in the right cases. Like in this case, people get mad because they want a fair living wage. So what do? They impede each other, and then that causes more anger, which brings guns to come out. And at the end of the day, death almost puts out the fire, so to speak. You know what I mean? Where it's like, it's this burning fire, and ironically, no pun intended, you're adding coal to the fire from both sides. And this death is just this like fucking splash of water. It's like, all right, well, actually though, we're human, remember? And everyone goes, oh shit, yeah, fuck, let's figure this out. It's like,
there's one scene I really want to talk about that I think is so harrowing, because like he's shot and I think he lives for a couple days before he dies. Yeah. And after he dies that night, there's a union meeting, and this like people are obviously very upset because this kid that they knew has been murdered, and he died because of what they were doing, what they were fighting for. The guy who is an organizer with the United Mine Workers, he's kind of trying to get the situation under control, and he's like, look, I have been told to let you all know the company has started talking. Like, they've started actually negotiating with us, because up to this point it's been, they would offer, the big sticking point was the company wanted to revoke the right to strike. They didn't want that to be in the contract. Right. And so they've kind of been like, we're not even going to talk about that. And he's like, look, they're at the table now. Like, they are talking. Like, we need to, view this as a terrible loss, but we need to move on. And there's these two old men that were there during Bloody Harlan that give speeches. The first one gets up and he's like, I was there. Like, he's like, I lined men up in my sights and I shot them. And he's like, right now, Basil Collins is out there and we need revenge. Like, it's time to get in the tree lines. It's time to get our high-powered rifles, and it's time to lay the lead to them. And everybody like cheers, and they're like, okay, like, are we going to go to war? And this other old man gets up and he's, God, it's like, it's so sad, but he's like, it's so sad that a young man had to die for this. He's like, why couldn't I have died for this? Because I'm almost spent. I'm an old man. And he's like, I was also there during Bloody Harlan, and, it was bloody. A man died at my feet. Yeah. And he's like, if there was a night to hold the peace, it's tonight. Yes. And like, ultimately, that's what they do. But, I mean, it is this meeting where they're literally like, are we going to go to war? Like, is that what's going to have to happen now?
And again, it shows an interesting dichotomy of how you can deal with loss. Some people get fucking angry, and even though they've been through similar events, one guy gets really fucking angry. Is like, well, the only thing that will make sense is violence, which, I tend to disagree with. But and the other guy's like, listen, like this what we wanted was peace at the beginning, right? Let's hold to that, because I've seen the alternative, and I identify with that a lot. I think it's a really beautiful way of looking at things, where it's like, you don't want to taint his memory with more bloodshed, in my opinion. So
yeah,
it's hard.
I definitely understand both sides, and like obviously, it's so sad that he died for it, but like that is what got them to the table, and they even. There's a organizer with the United Mine Workers. He says that. He's just like, this is what got them to the table. He's like, obviously it's a tragedy, but they're at the table now, and that's all we can, that's all we can think about. That's, we need to just keep working towards this contract. We don't need to get emotional. Lost. Yeah, we don't need to get make this a personal thing. We just need to worry about that contract, because that's what this is all about.
That's what he died for, so to speak. Yeah. And it's just... And
he even says, he's like, look, these cameras are here, and they've captured everything. He's like, if they weren't, this man's life would have been a 2-paragraph thing in the Harlan County Gazette or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, but because they saw it, and because they're going to broadcast it to the world, his death meant something. Like, yeah,
and now I know his name and what he fought for, and that's really cool when you think about that. So, like you said, it's heart-wrenching, but it's when life, I mean, not to make light of it, but it's like, you have to keep moving forward, right? No matter what happens, and just try to do your best and be civil as much as you can. So yeah, that was a really good scene. I agree with that. So as far as the rest of the movie goes, it's kind of just the aftermath of that. Like I said, they do end up agreeing with the company on things. I'm sure that, obviously this is the nitty gritty, but there's details on both sides. I'm sure there's concessions on both sides, and eventually it's agreed upon. And everyone's really happy about that for a bit. And it seems like everyone's on the up and up. The union seems very confident, and at the end of the day, the corporation, was like, hey, yeah, like, let's get back to work then. And pretty quickly, though, it's like, yeah, you guys won the strike, but guess what? You have to keep fighting. And pretty shortly after, I think it's even like, is it 3 months after they get it? Like,
it's just a few months of being back to work, and
they strike again.
Yeah, and this one, it was a national strike. Like, this was all UMWA workers. This wasn't just like them trying to get a contract. And sadly, what what was going on was, like I said, the sticking point was they didn't want the right to strike to be taken out. Because they're like, once you do that, they interview one guy, and he's just like, I can file a grievance. If that doesn't work, that's the only thing I have is the right to strike.
Right.
And so that's what they get. They're happy about it. A few months later, for the first time in UMWA history, all the miners get to vote on the contract. Like national contract is negotiated, and then the miners themselves get to ratify it. They vote for it.
Correct.
It passes. The contract passes, but it does not have the right to strike at the local level. So the only strikes that would be ratified would be national strikes. And at that point, their only options would be wildcat strikes, which would be, non-union sanctioned, and they wouldn't have access to strike funds. So it's like, it's heart-wrenching that, like, this, he's a kid, you know what I mean? He was so young. He died, and they get this contract, and it's around for a few months. And then, the sticking point is given, the president is just like, oh, okay, yeah. We will give this concession to the to the mine owners.
Yeah, and that's something too. It the whole movie kind of ends with that, and it's, it seems to be very, how do I say, lamenting on the fact that where it's like, we fought so hard, but still we have to fight every single day. Because these guys work in terrible conditions. It's awful, and not to disparage what they're doing or insult them. I'm just saying, like, they have a hard, physically intensive job, very, very difficult. I think we can agree. And the thing that it really focuses on is like there's a guy. He's walking into work, and the camera crew stops him and asks him. They say, "Hey, what do you think about the strike?" And he's like, "Well, it's fine, I guess. Like, it doesn't really help me. It helps younger people, which is good for them for wages, but I've been here for 30, 40 years. I don't really see much of a change from it. And he goes on to say, like, they were promising us $50 a day. It's never going to happen. And he goes, in 6 years from now, it's still never going to happen. And it's just like, he's, in his mid-50s. And he's like, by the time he's done working, he's going to be retired. Like, even then, it may not be done even then. And so it's like, it's hard. Like I said, it's heart-wrenching to see, because it's like these people, there's so much, tears were shed for this. And unfortunately, it's like, that was just level one. You got to keep going. And it's just, it's so hard to see it. And it really brings into question kind of the socioeconomic state of the world we live in, right? And so going back up to a macro view, like, yes, we're looking at these case studies essentially of one certain occupation. But the problem that they're having can apply to so many people around the world. As you mentioned, like, and this is not to disparage anybody in other countries that certain countries use as manufacturing facilities. Like, say, look at the way that, China can be used or stuff like that. Yes, you can kind of apply this kind of same concept to higher socioeconomic ideas as well, on like a worldwide view, where it's like, we're just looking at the coal miners here, right? But there's so many other occupations and other parts of the economy as a whole that just don't suit some people based on, one country's specific, laws and regulations. Like the way that China handles their manufacturing and wages over there, and the way that U.S. handles that are starkly different. And I'm no expert on, world economy, mind you, but you have to consider, like, it's, I mean, you hear it every day in the news, but it's like, what is the best way to accommodate the most people fairly? And unfortunately, that's so ingrained in the political structure here, like we said before, it's so hard to make that change. And it's so much of it's driven by that sports team mentality of like us versus them, the right versus the left, the U.S. versus everybody else. Any way you look at it, it's just, it's so rigid, and it's so hard to actually make change for people who really need it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it's, it's designed that way. You know what I mean? Now with strikes and things, it's not, nearly as common, or I don't know if it really happens. So there was another kind of labor incident in Harlan County in 2019. And thankfully it did not get violent or anything. It was just a mine had, I don't remember. I don't remember if they closed or what, but, a mine hadn't paid its employees, and some guys went down there and they're like, what the fuck, where's our checks? And they were like, they're like, oh, okay, well, you're shit out of luck. So these guys just went and stood on the train tracks, and they're like, well, your trains aren't going to leave with the coal then. Like, if we don't get our money, you don't get to ship the coal out. And they were there for quite a while. Like, this whole thing formed around it where they just stood on the tracks. They're like, and it, thankfully did not get violent. But what I'm getting at, oh, you go ahead.
No.
But what I'm getting at is, the labor movement, thankfully, in America is really kind of taken off again, because things have gotten kind of so bad in a lot of ways that, this takes place in the 70s, which was the last time that union representation was like really high in this country, and it's been on the decline ever since, ever since the Reagan administration. And now we're on the up again, because it's gotten pretty bad. Like, wages have stagnated. From what I have seen, they aren't hiring people with guns anymore. They're hiring lawyers, and they're hiring, which, I mean, they always had lawyers, but they're hiring lawyers, and they're hiring these firms that go in and they're like, this is why you don't need a union. So what I'm getting at is, like, this is on purpose. You know what I mean? They don't want people to realize that the things that are important, the divisions that are important, are socioeconomic. They're not like Republican, Democrat, because it doesn't matter.
Right. Exactly.
It doesn't matter who you want to be president because of X, Y, or Z. Like, what matters is that you could get a better paycheck. You could get respect in your workplace, but you have to work with people that you disagree with.
Right, exactly. And that's like, at the end of the day, that's something I think so many people just need to be better about. This is a good thing to show people what can happen, what bad things can happen as a result of failure to communicate, of a failure to compromise, which is why we have so much political gridlock in a lot of ways in this country. You have no middle ground. Nobody wants to concede anything. Like I said, it's a sports game. It's the same mentality. Us versus them. The idiots versus the smart ones. And everyone can decide their own which one's which. And that's just such a toxic fucking environment. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's just such a... They don't want people to realize because it takes money away from those who could benefit from them realizing. I mean, from them not realizing, you know what I mean? So it's sad. It really is sad. But again, it goes back to the previous point I mentioned where it's like, if you're rich, a lot of the time, you're going to want to stay rich, whatever that means. You know what I mean? And it's a means to an end, so to speak, and that's sad. But again, there are people who are well off who can make the right decisions and do every day. I mean, you can see that every day. There are good people. Unfortunately, yeah, it's just, you want to see that in everybody, but it's hard.
But yeah, I don't know. I think that I really like this movie. I like it a lot for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. So what does it mean to you specifically?
Yeah, so not even just for one, I really like that it kind of dispels a lot of these stereotypes about Appalachians, just by showing Appalachians, just by letting them talk. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are these stereotypes about how, especially what I'm thinking of is, we can get into that guy's like, oh, I wouldn't want my wife to be acting like that. And it does show that, these Appalachian women are strong and independent. Like, I understand that. And this is just, partly it was a different time in which, a household could get by on one income. And, the mines have always been, and I'm not saying this is right, but like the mine workers were all men. But all I'm getting at is like, it shows these women as competent, as strong, as intelligent. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, they understand the game. They know what they're doing in a way that a lot of people do not attribute to uneducated people. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And like, obviously it's the same for the men and women, but I think that that's particularly impactful to me, that it's like, look at how amazing these women are being. Like, they're even showing up the men, like that the men you would think would have a stronger interest because like it is their place of work. But it's like, no, the women are fighting just as hard, if not harder. And there's that scene when they like barricade the road and they all have their guns out, pointing out the strike breakers. And the men are like behind the car with their guns, and the women are just kind of in front of it, just like singing. And they're just like,
and she walks up on the fucking strike breaker, and she's got a bat, and she's like, "All right, let's do this. Then is it now or never?"
Yeah,
and I'm just like, "Oh Jesus!" Like,
they're
whoa.
basically just like, you don't have the fucking balls to shoot me. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah. So I love that about it. I love the music.
Oh yeah.
I think that the music is so great, and the rendition of "Oh Death," that's just kind of this old kind of Appalachian folk song that those two sing, that old man and that younger woman. And also it has a lot of music that is explicitly like this old Appalachian folk music that is explicitly kind of left, you know what I mean, in a way that people, especially now, are just like, oh, it's all Trump country. And like I've said, yeah, Appalachia tends to vote right now and tends to vote Republican, but for what I would consider understandable reasons. I don't agree with them, but I mean, I also don't agree with the Democrats. You know what I mean? Like, the Democrats left the area to the Republicans. There's a reason that this happened, So yeah, I think that there's a lot of reasons that I really like it, and it's obviously, from the historical perspective of getting to see this strike and how bad it can get and like what it takes. But just as like this cultural thing where like we get to see this slice of Appalachia in the 70s. And, like I know I've told you this before, but and I mean, that older generation in my family is dying. You know what I mean? Like there aren't that many of them left that
Sure.
really have like that thick kind of Appalachian accent where one thing I've always thought was it really interesting is like all of their names end in A. So it's like Viola, Oma, Bertha. But for some reason, it's like instead of that, it's pronounced Berthy and Omi. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And like that's something that we see in this movie that I just love where people, like at one point they say extra, but it's extra. And
Yeah.
like I don't know, I just love stuff like that because like I don't really speak that way. I don't speak like I do somewhat, and especially when I talk to my grandma, I kind of slip into it more. But once that generation of my family is gone, some of that culture dies with them. So like this is just such a neat little snapshot for me to see that older generation and like the ways they speak and the things they believe and why they believe them. And I mean, I think that's why it means so much to me. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like it is just such a great little cultural touchstone for me.
Yeah, that's interesting to know actually, because I can't say that like I would say that I definitely do have family with roots here as well. I believe my grandmother was pretty well rooted here as well, in Appalachia. Um, but I have to say that like um, I have to say that like this movie really made me kind of get a better understanding of this history and of Appalachia in general, because you always, like I said, in school I would always hear about this, but I never got the details. I never got really the ins and outs, who's and whys. It was all just kind of like, this happened. It's like, okay, well, what are the overall implications? Like, why did it happen? Who was involved? Like, what was the resolution? And sometimes those answers are pretty lengthy. But like you said, I think it really kind of it does a great job of really kind of breaking a lot of stereotypes of uneducated people and people who, I hate to say it, like I would unfortunately, and this has happened before too. When I've been out of state, people I say I'm from Appalachia or around Appalachia, and people go, "Oh wow, so you guys have like moonshine and shit, right?" I'm like, well. Like, listen, like it's a little more than that. Like, it's not just like the stereotypical, like straw hat and overalls and all that stuff. Like, it's just that's not how it is. It's the stereotype is unhealthy, and there's a really really beautiful, rich culture there that people
Yeah.
just don't know about. I think, and it's not that even there's a negative connotation. It's just people don't know it's there, and it's really interesting. Like you said, the songs in this movie really accentuate that, where there's such heart in them, and just it's really honest, like people singing songs, even if they didn't write the songs. It's just you can hear it in their voice. Like it means so much to them.
Yeah. But yeah, so I like, like I said, there are a lot of reasons I really like this one. But yeah, I like this one a lot. I'm glad that we got to watch it. What did you think overall? Like, how did you? I know we talked a lot about it, but kind of how did you
Yeah,
feel about it walking away from it?
walking away from it, I think, like I said, it was probably more educational and in some ways depressing, which I think is kind of the intent, like I said before, just to kind of show you like this is what can happen, and let's think about how we live and what we depend on day to day, from not just social economic needs, but from emotional needs as well. It was a good time. I enjoyed it. I thought it was well shot, like you said. Really strong move, in my opinion, to skip the narrator and just have the people themselves talk. There's definitely a lot of heart in the people who are on the cameras, and just like I said before, a lot of emotional honesty, and that's just a good way to be. Like, as long as you're not hurting each other, you always be honest. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
just like that will only make people better. But yeah, I think I would recommend this to people, especially if they don't know much about Appalachia. Go watch this. It will change or enlighten you to things you didn't know about. And we'll educate you too on just some history about how unions work and how strikes work. Because walking into this, I didn't really know like even basic terminology. Like what's a scab? What's like, just stuff like that. Like I just didn't grasp. And now I understand that, which will also kind of help me in day-to-day life nowadays as well. So
Yeah.
it's better. It's a good way to conceptualize stuff because unfortunately, a lot of people's understanding about this stuff is taken from the news or from hearsay and not really from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So it's kind of you get some distortion there, for lack of a better word, depending on who you talk to in certain ways, one way or the other. And that's not, all I'm saying is like, it's very educational, I think. So yeah, overall, thank you for showing it to me. I think it was fun. And like I said, it's something I definitely don't think I would have interacted with otherwise. Simply because it's such a heavy subject matter, I typically don't get into stuff like that. But yeah, no, I think it's only going to make me more educated to talk about stuff like this from cultural and historical perspective. So yeah, overall, a good time.
And one quick little thing I wanted to say about it, and it just never kind of came up naturally, but I just wanted to share this. Mm-hmm. There is a quote by one of the miners that he was basically just saying, like, yeah, the cameras being there saved so much bloodshed. He was like, yeah, stuff got bad, but if those cameras hadn't been there, I think that a lot more people would have died.
That's a good point.
And somebody, brought this to the director's attention, and they were like, did you realize that this is what you were doing? And she was like, oh, yeah, absolutely. She said there were so many days that we had run out of film. We didn't have any film in the camera, but we pretended to be shooting. And I would go around and talk to people and pretend to interview them because she's like, I knew that if I didn't, things would get worse. So just the, them being there helped,
Of course, yeah. And it's just like once there's a camera, like, People know there's a camera, at least they'll act a little differently. I get that.
So, yeah. So I just, like I said, it didn't come up naturally, but I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Well, awesome, man. Is there anything else on this you wanted to kind of touch on, go over, or is that it for the week, you think?
No, I think I'm good. I'm just excited to see what I am going to be interacting with for next week.
All right, then. So I will ask you my favorite question. What do you think you're getting?
Okay. So this week I'm definitely getting some anime. I'm finally going to have an answer to the question that you always pose, which is, who is your favorite anime shonen protagonist?
Oh, yeah.
I've never watched anime, so I don't have an answer to that. Except, when I was a kid, I watched Pokemon, so maybe Ash Ketchum. But yeah, I'm guessing it's going to be anime.
That works. That's a valid answer. So, you are correct. That's 2 weeks in a row you're correct on this. So, now, the question is, what kind of anime? Do you have any ideas? Any hazard, any guesses?
You've told me about some of the anime you watch. I don't know that much about it. I know that it seems like a lot of it falls into the category that you've explained to me is shonen, which seems to be kind of more action heavy, geared towards maybe young men.
Yep.
So I'm just going to guess it's something like that.
Well, I would not consider this a shonen. No, I would consider it a seinen, actually, which is going to be a little bit more for older audiences. So with that being said, I am going to have you watch what I would call a mystery / horror thriller anime. Very different. By the name of Mononoke. It is a TV anime series. I'm going to have you watch some specific episodes, and basically what this show is there's a titular main character known as the medicine seller. And the medicine seller is going around point to point and interacting with these various kind of lingering spirits or lingering ghosts called the Mononoke, and trying to figure out where they are, why they're there, and what to do with them. And so there's going to be two kind of arcs, I'll say, two kind of overall stories that I'm going to have you watch. I'm going to have you actually start in the middle of the show, believe it or not. I'm going to have you start with episode 3 through 5, and that is going to cover the Umibozu story. So that's going to be on a merchant ship, so to speak. And then I'm going to have you watch episode 6 and 7, which is going to be the Nopara Bo, I think is how you say that. And that's going to be taking place in a prison between the medicine seller and a woman. So those are the two stories I want you to kind of look over and watch. And I want to hear your feedback, because this show is so unique because it actually borrows a lot of its theming, its style, and its color, and overall storytelling from kabuki theater, which is a traditional Japanese style of storytelling. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that. I'm definitely not an expert on it. That's a whole art form. But kabuki is extremely, involved, and there's a lot of really interesting things historically that have been done with that. But they borrow a lot of those themes for the presentation of this. So it's a really interesting kind of anime. I will say this. I am not showing you a standard anime for your first one. This is by far the most unique anime I think I've seen, because you look at stuff, other shonen, like you look at Naruto, you look at One Piece, you look at, Jujutsu Kaisen, those are all shonens. You can kind of see, okay, there's a main character here, you've got the squad, the people around them, blah, blah, blah. But Mononoke is so different in that aspect, and because I think it's a wild ride, and I think it's a fun wild ride. So I'm really excited to hear how you take it, because like you said, I think the only anime you've watched really, and unfortunately I can't add to the list in good faith because we've watched together, is Yu-Gi-Oh! and Pokemon. Am I mistaken?
Yeah, I watched Pokemon when I was a kid. I watched Yu-Gi-Oh! At your house one time. We didn't even watch much. We just watched a few episodes. And it definitely, not that I didn't enjoy it, but it definitely felt like we were kind of laughing at it. And like it was fun, but it also was like, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is fucking the Godfather. You know what I mean? Or whatever. So I'm interested to maybe more earnestly interact with anime.
Yeah, and this, first of all, don't you ever fucking shit on Yu-Gi-Oh! I will end this podcast right here and now if you fucking do that again.
I'm not shitting on it. I'm just saying that, like, it was pretty goofy. Like, it was fun and I really liked it, but like, it's, like I said, I'm just excited to maybe be a little bit more earnest is all I'm getting at about.
You look at Maximilian J. Pegasus and you tell me he is not the most interesting, well thought out character you've ever seen in anime, because I will die by that. No, in all honesty, like, this one's actually very serious. I think in a lot of ways, it actually has a lot to say. So as much as it's a different vibe. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. We can talk offline on how you can absorb that information. Mm-hmm. But yeah, do you have any other questions for me before you go watch that shit for the week? Because I think I'm really curious to hear what you think about it.
I'm gonna be really upset if it's called Mononoke.
Yes, Mononoke.
I'm going to be really upset if I start Mononoke and it's like this really serious kind of thing. And then out of nowhere, this little guy's like, little Yugi.
Oh, God, if Weevil Underwood, God damn it. If Weevil Underwood were in Mononoke, I don't think I'd watch any other media ever.
But yeah, I'm excited. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be, and once again, we're figuring out the format, so a TV show will be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's the first one we've done of this, right? The first episodic, really, thing we've done. So yeah, only 5 episodes. Not terrible, I don't think, as far as amount of content. Because overall, it's a 12-episode series. We can walk through what you see there, and maybe if you ever wanted to go back and finish the show, yeah, we can do that later. But yeah, I'll leave that with you for the week then. Is there anything else before we adjourn and tell our wonderful audience thank you?
No, I think that we are good. I will just plug our email address, which is bestfriendsdissimilarinsterests@gmail.com. If anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions, just send it that way. Yeah, corrections, send it that way, and we will see it.
Yep, absolutely. As always, thank you guys very much for tuning in. We appreciate all of you listening, even if you just turned us on for 5 seconds and then turned us off. Hey, that counts as a play on the analytics. So, hey, thank you. No, but in all earnesty, we hope you guys enjoyed our interaction here. If you have any friends who you have never asked these questions to or has never shared anything with, maybe start sharing some. Get to know them a little bit better because, I've gleaned a lot so far from this. But hope you guys have a great day. Hope you guys have a great week, great month, wherever you are. And we'll see you next week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And thank you for co-hosting, Tiberi.
Thank you, Matt. I'll talk to you after you've watched 5 episodes of Mononoke.
See you then.
Bye.